Welcome back to Bible in a Year or So. I'm so glad that you have come back. After finishing Ezekiel, you should spend the week polishing off Daniel, Hosea, and Joel. Daniel, Hosea, and Joel. I love Daniel. So, what should you know about Daniel? Well, Daniel is written in Babylon. Daniel is doing his prophecy in Babylon, and he's in exile there from Judah. He was taken there during the first deportation, and so he got to Babylon a couple of years before Ezekiel did. And he was given a Babylonian name, which is Belteshazzar, but we know him by his Jewish name of Daniel, which means God is my judge. God is my judge. How cool is that? What we know about Daniel is that he was very handsome and smart and healthy and fit to be trained as one of the kids who serves at the palace, because those were the criteria you had to meet to be picked as one of the kids who serves at the palace. And Nebuchadnezzar was looking for young men who had been abducted in the first deportation to serve in the palace. And so Daniel and his three friends, who we know best by their Babylonian names. Their Babylonian names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were supposed to eat a special diet that the Babylonians had prepared for them. That's a really neat story. Don't miss it. Daniel also had a special gift from God. He could tell the meaning of dreams and visions, and that's a pretty special gift. And it comes into play in the very beginning of the book when King Nebuchadnezzar has a very troubling dream, but he won't tell any of his advisors what it is. He wants them to tell him what the dream was, because then he'll believe that they have an interpretation of the dream that's accurate. If they can't tell him what the dream was, he can't trust the interpretation. This is a really neat story, too. And only Daniel can tell him what the dream of the Colossus meant with the clay feet. And by the way, this is the story from which we get the expression in English about having feet of clay. So it's a neat story. Be sure you read it. Then King Nebuchadnezzar decides to build a gold statue and have everybody worship it, which gives his jealous advisors a chance to accuse Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego of not being team players, and they should be all burned up. And this is a really neat story. This is a really neat story. And this is one of the stories of Daniel that shows up in our lectionary, and it shows up on Easter Vigil. And I just love this story. I loved it when I was a kid in Sunday school because I thought it was pretty cool, the whole fire thing. But now, as an older and wiser woman, I love it for what it says in chapter 3, verses 16. Now, Nebuchadnezzar has just told Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that they need to bow down and worship him so he doesn't have to throw them into the fire. And what they reply is this. The three men replied, "Your Majesty, we don't need to defend ourselves. The God we worship can save us from you and your flaming furnace. But even if he chooses not to, we still won't worship your gods and the gold statue that you have set up." I love this story. You will too. As you read the story, you're going to notice that this is also one of the places where Jesus shows up in the Old Testament. And then you're going to read the story about King Nebuchadnezzar's second dream, in which Nebuchadnezzar dreams of a very tall tree in the center of the world. And Nebuchadnezzar writes a letter about what this dream was and about how Daniel interpreted it. And that's a neat story. In the next story, Nebuchadnezzar's son Belshazzar is giving a banquet. And as he and his guests are getting drunk, they decide that what they really need are the gold and silver cups that the Babylonians had taken away from the temple in Jerusalem. That what they really need to continue their drinking are these gold and silver cups, which of course is sacrilegious. And so they have just sort of gotten busy on committing their sacrilege when a hand appears. And it starts writing on the wall, and it starts writing, "Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin." And this is the story from which comes the common expression in English, "I have seen the handwriting on the wall," because of what this hand writing on the wall says. And Daniel is the one who comes forward and interprets the message. And then that night, Darius the Mede takes over. Cool story. The next story is in chapter 6, and it's the very well-known story about Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel manages to get crosswise with Darius and his advisors because he remains faithful to God. And he gets thrown into a lion's den. And you, of course, know the rest of the story, but it's a neat story to be reread. And then we get to chapter 7. And up to now in Daniel, the first 6 chapters of Daniel have been making terrific sense. And they have been encouraging us to stay faithful, whether or not we get rescued. Well, now we're in chapter 7, and it's like you've been walking along and everything is fine, and then you find yourself in the deep end of the pool. Daniel has this vision in chapter 7 of the 4 beasts coming out of the sea. And then in chapter 8, Daniel has this vision about a ram and a goat, which the archangel Gabriel comes down and conveniently interprets for him. In chapter 9, Daniel reads Jeremiah's prophecy that Jerusalem will lie in ruins for 70 years. And he's still repenting on behalf of the people and praying for the people when suddenly Gabriel appears again. And this time he has a pretty confusing message about 70 weeks and the Antichrist and the abomination of desolation. And then comes a vision about a horrible war. And then an angel shows up with a story about how he was coming immediately. God sent him immediately as soon as Daniel started praying to answer Daniel's prayer. But unfortunately, this angel, one of the good guy angels, had been stopped by one of the guardian angels of Persia. And this angel and the guardian angel of Persia were in severe combat. And the angel God had sent was being delayed until the archangel Gabriel came. And I don't mean the archangel Gabriel. I mean the archangel Michael. Until the archangel Michael came and rescued him. This is spiritual warfare stuff. This is fascinating stuff to think about, and so I hope you will. And then comes a 4-part message from the angel about the end of time. Now, what I want you to remember here are 2 things. First of all, what you are reading is full-blown apocalyptic. The whole thing since chapter 7 begins has been full-blown apocalyptic. And apocalyptic is always 2 things. First of all, it's an assurance that God is completely in charge of the events of history, no matter how it looks. God is in charge. And second, well, pay attention to what Daniel is told in Daniel 12, verses 9 to 13. Let me read that to you. I heard what the angel said, writes Daniel, but I didn't understand it, and neither will you at the time. So I said, Sir, how will it end? And the angel in my vision then replied, now here's the part. Daniel, go about your business, because the meaning of this message will remain secret until the end of time. Many people will have their hearts and lives made pure and clean, but those who are evil will keep on being evil and never understand. Only the wise will understand. There will be 1,290 days from the time that the daily sacrifices are stopped until someone sets up the horrible thing or the abomination of desolation that causes destruction. God will bless everyone who patiently waits until 1,335 days have gone by. So, Daniel, now here's the important part. Be faithful until the end. You will rest, meaning you will die and fall asleep. You will rest. And at the end of time, you will rise from death to receive your reward. You're saying, no, wait a minute, what is all this stuff about all these days? Okay, look, the important thing to remember from this is this part. Daniel, go about your business, because the meaning of this message will remain secret until the end of time. Go about your business, because nobody's going to know what this means until the end of time. Now, I know that we're going to spend a good amount of time on this when we get together. And I've got to tell you right now, you cannot understand Revelation. You don't even have a prayer of understanding Revelation without understanding Ezekiel and Daniel. Yeah, but nobody can understand Ezekiel and Daniel except for this. Two things. First, things are going to get a whole lot worse. You think it's bad now? Things are going to get worse. Things are going to get worse. So don't be surprised when they do. That's number one. Number two, God's in control. And the third thing, I know I said there were two things, but I meant there are three things. And the third thing is, you be faithful. You be faithful, and God will raise you from the dead. And that's what to remember about Daniel. Great stories. Have lots of fun with Daniel. And then keep reading and read through Hosea. Now, Hosea is a major prophet who God sent to the northern kingdom of Israel to warn them to change their ways, or they were going to get carted off to Assyria. You all know what happens. Hosea's entire prophecy was a symbolic prophecy, and we've covered what symbolic prophecy was before. Hosea married a woman named Gomer, and you're thinking, oh, wait a minute, I thought Gomer was a guy. No, Gomer is a girl's name. Hosea marries a woman named Gomer, who's also a prostitute. And he did that because God told him to marry this prostitute as a way to show how unfaithful Israel has been. Israel has been so unfaithful in her covenant relationship with him. It's like marrying a woman and discovering she's a prostitute. In the course of being married to him, she has kids by other men, and God tells Hosea what to name them, and he gives them great names. The first one he names God Scatters. The second one he names No Mercy. The third one he names Not My People. Not My People. And Gomer gets sold to another man, but Hosea rescues her because God tells Hosea to rescue her. The point of Hosea is that God still loves his unfaithful people. He is going to punish them, but he promises to forgive them and to bless them again after they have learned how to be faithful to him. So read Hosea. Hosea is listed among the minor prophets because Hosea is not a very long book, but Hosea is major. And then comes Joel. Now, you remember how the prophet Jeremiah used a drought that the country was going through and pointing out to the people, you think your problem is this drought. No, the problem is that you are spiritually so dry that there's nothing going on. That is your real problem. Okay, well, Joel has seen locusts, the real thing, bugs, cover the land and destroy everything. And just in case you're trying to keep all of this straight, Joel was a prophet in the southern kingdom of Judah. So in Joel's prophecy, he speaks of the coming destruction of the land by the invading armies who would come like the day of the locust. And by the way, that's where we get that expression in English. And the locusts will cause terrible destruction, which the armies did. But that's only a small taste of what is going to happen on the judgment day of the Lord. That's only a little taste. But the Lord also promises in Joel that if the people would turn back to him, that he will forgive them and bless them. And I love two of the prophecies in Joel. Let me read them to you. The first one is in Joel 2, I think, 2, verses 25 to 27, where God says, I, the Lord your God, will make up for the losses caused by these swarms of locusts. Those swarms and swarms of locusts that I sent to attack you. My people, you will eat until you are satisfied, and then you will praise me for the wonderful things I have done. Never again will you be put to shame. Israel, you will know that I stand at your side. I am the Lord your God. There are no other gods. Never again will you be put to shame. Isn't that a great word? And the second prophecy comes right after it. This is Joel 2, verses 28 to 32. The Lord says later, in those last days later, I will give my spirit to everyone. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams, and your young men will see visions. In those days I will even give my spirit to my servants, both men and women. I will work wonders in the sky above and on the earth below. Now, of course, he's talking about the last day. There will be blood and fire and clouds of smoke. The sun will turn dark, and the moon will be red as blood before that great and terrible day when I appear. And then here's the point. Then the Lord will save everyone who faithfully worships him. He has promised that there will be survivors on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and among them will be his chosen ones. So what a wonderful word of promise this is. And you see words of promise all the way through the prophets. Yeah, they've got bad things to say. The foot is coming down, you're going to get stomped. Oh, but don't forget, never forget how much God loves his people and how much he intends well for them. And after they've gotten through this, things will get worse and worse and worse until they get better. And that's where we are. Have fun with this reading, and I will see you again soon.